On the edge of a quiet coastal town, nestled between cliffs and fog-washed pine trees, lived a woman named Lena Moreau. She was 62, tall, with silver hair tied loosely at the nape of her neck, and skin that carried the sun's kiss without apology. She had lived in that small wooden house by the sea for over 20 years, alone by choice, never married, no children, and not once in that time had she been seen with a trace of makeup. Locals whispered about her. They always had. "She used to be a model, you know," said the grocer's wife, bagging potatoes for a customer. "She's some kind of recluse, always out walking those cliffs," murmured a teenager on his bike. "I hear she's writing a book, but no one's ever seen it," said the postman. But none of them really knew her. Every morning at dawn, Lena stepped barefoot onto her porch with a mug of black coffee. Her face was lined, not deeply, but honestly, with softness around her mouth from years of unforced smiles. She wore thick woolen sweaters in winter and loose linen dresses in summer, not to charm, but to feel the day on her skin. She spent her mornings reading, her afternoons tending her vegetable garden, or walking along the cliffs with a stray dog that had adopted her. In town, she rarely spoke unless spoken to, but when she did, her voice was low and clear, as though each word had been polished before she said it. Years ago, she had lived a very different life in Paris. High heels, smoky bars, late-night parties, photographers calling her name. She'd been on magazine covers in her 20s. People stopped her on the street to ask about her lipstick, her hair, her secrets. But somewhere between the flashing lights and the constant expectation to be beautiful, she had begun to feel invisible in a different way. Not unseen, but unheard. She remembered the exact moment she chose a different life. She was sitting in a hotel suite in Milan, being fussed over before a runway show. Someone was applying foundation, another curling her hair. The stylist was asking her to wear something sheer that she didn't like. She looked at herself in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman looking back. "I look polished," she had thought, "but I'm not here." She left 2 months later, sold everything but her notebooks, her books, and a few boxes of clothes. She moved to a small rental on the coast of Brittany, not knowing what she'd find, only knowing she needed silence. She had expected loneliness. What she found was clarity. At first, the solitude was disorienting. No noise, no demands. She sat with herself for hours, facing all the parts of her she'd ignored: grief, confusion, childhood longings, and the exhaustion of always performing. There were nights she cried. Days she did nothing but watch the sea. But slowly her own voice, the one she had muted for decades, began to return. With it came a new rhythm of life. She began to write again, not for money or fame, but because the stories inside her had waited patiently, and now they came freely. She wrote about women who walked away from expectations, women who loved without apology, who aged without fear. She didn't share the stories, not yet, but she wrote them every day by hand in leather-bound journals stacked beside her bed. Makeup, once her armor, became irrelevant, not because she rejected beauty, but because she redefined it. Her face became her history, freckled from time, softened by rain and wind and unfiltered sunlight. When she looked in the mirror now, she saw someone fully herself. That was enough. Strangers sometimes mistook her for a woman who had given up. They saw her solitude in plain face and thought, she must be lonely. But they were wrong. Lena wasn't lonely. She was full. She had friends, though not many. A poet who lived 2 miles inland. A retired nurse she played chess with once a week. A young mother she helped during a storm, who now visited with her daughter every Sunday. None of them cared what Lena wore or how she looked. They came for her stories, her laughter, the way she listened without rushing to fill the silence. One spring afternoon, a magazine reached out to her. They wanted to do a "Where Are They Now" piece. Flattering, they said. Empowering. A tribute to her timeless beauty. Lena declined. She didn't need to be remembered for how she looked. She wanted to be remembered for how she lived. One summer, a teenage girl knocked on her door. Her name was Clara. She had found one of Lena's old modeling photos online and was curious. How did a woman go from flashing lights to a quiet life on a cliff? Clara expected a lecture or perhaps bitterness. What she found instead was tea and a warm slice of bread, and a woman who spoke to her not as an adult to a child, but as one soul to another. "You don't owe the world your prettiest face," Lena told her. You owe it your truest self, the girl cried. She would return many times over the years. Lena never married, not because she didn't believe in love, but because she believed in peace more. She had fallen in love once, deeply, with a pianist in Prague. They'd shared a beautiful year, but in the end, he wanted children, a city life, and she wanted the sound of gulls and an open sky. They parted kindly. She wrote about him once. By the time Lena turned 70, her hair was pure silver. She wore it long, tucked behind her ears. People still stared sometimes, confused by her ease, by the absence of performance. A reporter once asked her during a rare interview, "What kind of woman chooses solitude and no makeup?" She smiled, "The kind who has nothing left to prove." That line was printed in bold beneath her photograph. But even that didn't fully answer the question, because the truth was more complex. Lena chose solitude because she had lived in noise and found it wanting. She chose no makeup not out of rebellion but reverence for her own skin, her own truth. She wasn't trying to make a point. She was trying to be real. That, it turned out, was the most radical act of all. At her funeral 10 years later, there were no flashing cameras, just friends, readers, and a handful of strangers who had read her essays, passed around like secret letters. Clara, now a woman herself, read from one of Lena's unpublished notebooks. She gave us permission to be whole. And they all nodded, because they had known the kind of woman who chooses solitude and no makeup, and she had changed them forever.